solving equations using inverse operations. Now, the word opposite in math is very tricky. There are various types of opposites. So consider the number 3. When somebody says the opposite of 3, sometimes they mean 1/3. Was that the opposite that you were thinking? Sometimes people say, well, the opposite of 3 is subtract 3. Sometimes when people say the opposite of 3, really they mean the -3. Anyways, my point is there are many different types of opposites. Sometimes it's called the reciprocal. Now, the reciprocal is a type of opposite, but I do not use the word opposite. I use the word reciprocal. Sometimes when we add 3, the opposite of adding 3 is subtracting 3. So this would be known, what I just called, as the inverse operation. Right? So if you were thinking, oh, I'm adding 3, the opposite of adding 3 is subtracting 3, that is called the inverse, and it's very important. And the opposite of 3, if you're just thinking the number 3, well, then the opposite of 3, maybe for some of you, might be the negative. Sometimes referred to as polarity. So we have this reciprocal, we have the inverse, and we have the negative. I'm sure that I'm missing a few as well. So the word opposite really is imprecise. But we're going to be exploiting one of the opposites called the inverse. The inverse is very, very important. So the inverse is a particular type that is critical in algebra and equations. The inverse operation is an undoing. So I'm just listed on the left-hand side. It is listed as tying your shoe. Now, how do you undo tying your shoe? Well, actually, it's kind of self-explanatory. You untie your shoe. That would be your inverse. That would be 1. So if an operation is to walk in the room, the inverse would be walking out of the room. And what's interesting is if the operation was to walk in and you do the inverse is walk out, you're in the same place where you were before you started. Now, the inverse of adding 3, of adding 3, the inverse is subtract 3. Now, on the other hand, 7, subtracting 7. So if you subtract 7, the inverse, how do you undo subtracting 7? For example, if you have $10 and somebody subtracts 7, the inverse would be to add 7. The inverse of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2. The inverse of dividing by 4 is multiplying by 4. Now I'm just going to highlight some of the key words. If the operation was adding, the inverse was subtract. If your operation was subtracting, we add. If the operation was multiplying, we're dividing. And if our operation was to divide, the inverse is multiply. These are inverses. So inverse operations are often used to solve equations when isolating a variable. It might be helpful to define what we mean by some vocabulary. A solution. I thought I was being clever here. If you look at the word, I missed the word equation. I can't even get to my clever comment yet. Equation. An equation is an open sentence. Yeah? Containing a variable. So I'm just going to say x plus 3 is equal to 4. Allow me to say something plus 3 is equal to 4. It's an open statement. A solution is the value of variable. That makes the statement true. For example, the equation is x plus 3 is equal to 4. The solution, the variable, the value of the variable that makes it true is 1. Most of the time, people call the solution the answer, but it is a solution. Now, if you notice solution, I used to spell the solution with a V. And I did that intentionally because the word solve is related to solution. Solving is just the process to find a solution. Or it's the command word to find the solution.